like to call to order the February 3rd, 2024 Committee of the Whole regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. Those who are able, please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone joining us in person this evening and those viewing remotely from home. The board held an executive session prior to this meeting regarding legal case number 2024-00050. Board members with an agenda before you, are there any changes? Okay, excellent. Then I'd like to call on the board secretary for a roll call.
Here.
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 Here. Here. Here.
Here. Here.
Thank you. I'd like now to invite Mr. Johnson to share his superintendent update.
Thank you, Amy. February is Black History Month. Wow. And in honor of it, I would like to share some highlights of how the district are recognizing achievements of African Americans and their contributions to our nation's history in the coming weeks. So one of the activities is art and poetry activities springing from this year's MLK Day in Service theme of unity through collaboration and connection. Another is student-led video projects on Black history. Another is student-created Google slide presentations on famous African Americans and allies, which will be presented on our TV screens in our buildings. Profile stories highlighting several African American employees and their contributions to our school community. Annual African American read-in, where community members read aloud to our students. And then please note the Lift Every Voice Student Cultural Showcase is scheduled for this April of this year. Other information, congratulations to State High football team for winning a 2024-25 National Football Foundation High School Academic Excellence Award. The honor was presented by Rose Bowl Legacy Foundation to 63 state level winners nationwide for fostering a culture of academic success. As one of our 4 Pennsylvania high schools recognized, State High is now in the running for the national award, the NFF Hatchell Cup. Additionally, the library department would like to extend an invitation to all K-12 students and families to our SCASD Reads Family Night on February 5th. This event was a huge success last year with over 1,000 attendees. This year, with the theme of exploring animal adventures, we will have special celebrity guest readers, books, animals, crafts, games, and giveaways. Additionally, members of the board of directors will be in attendance to discuss current issues or answer any questions you may have. We hope you can join us because we know that a community that reads together succeeds together. That's it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Student Representative Ryan Brown, tongue-tied, will provide us with an update on student initiatives.
Thank you, Dr. Bader. Congratulations to our high school students for their National Scholastic Arts and Rating Awards. Renee Buda was awarded a gold key for essay Lessons from a Sapling that she wrote in her Nature Ratings class. Winning 2 silver keys each, Zoe McAlleris was honored for drawing an illustration and Yidi Zhang for painting.
Thank you, Ryan. Next up, we have legislative update. Jackie, do you have anything to share?
So at the state level, it's pretty quiet right now. We're waiting for Josh Shapiro to make his announcement to introduce his budget proposal for this fiscal year. I don't even know how to cover the federal government at this point. But I will say that it was easy to miss on Friday. There was a bill proposed in the House of Representatives to eliminate the Department of Education at the federal level.
One piece of good news, though, was that the state did deny the AI charter application, so that entity at this time won't be
launching.
Granted a charter in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
A charter school that promised to teach your kids everything they need to know in 2 hours a day with AI. So
Yeah.
that was denied.
Yeah, so we'll end on a good note, at least in my opinion. So next up, we have Center Region Council of Governments, Gretchen or Peter.
So there hasn't been a lot since last week, but there was a very important
There was.
thing last
Yeah,
Monday.
yeah.
Peter will report.
Yeah, thank you very much. Last Monday, the Center Region Council of Governments became the 10th entity to enter into the solar power purchase agreement, ending the decision-making odyssey that we have been on now for 5 years and change. So they joined Center County, College Township Water Authority, Ferguson Township, Harris Township, Patton Township, State College Borough Water Authority, and the illustrious State College Area School District in signing on to this project. It is estimated that just under 80% of the power for the combined governments will go into the PPA 15-year contract, as this board knows. The vote, there were 2 votes on the floor, just so that it's very clear. One was to commit 80% of the COGS power to the PPA. That was recommended by 4 of their committees. And then the other was to pay their outstanding, the remainder of legal fees at $4,727, also put forward by 4 committees. I am emphasizing 4 committees because I think it's really important to note that this project has probably had more scrutiny applied to it than just about any other special project in the region ever. Maybe a regional park comes close, but it has gotten an awful lot. Anyway, so that was very exciting. As the chair of the PPA working group, there are a few people who I would like to take a moment to thank. So they include members of the project management team, Pam Adams, the sustainability planner for the Center Region Council of Governments, Gretchen Brandt, my fellow board director here, Randy Brown, our finance director, Keith Dingwall, who works with Randy Brown, John Franek, the executive administrator for the Center County government, Larry Pager, the finance director for Patton Township, Greg Shively, who works at Green Sky, our energy services consultant, and Joe Vigilone, who is our assistant finance director, associate finance director, one of those, who works with Randy and was our first sort of primary staff driver along with Pam of the project. And Annette Whittingham, who has helped with meetings and has supported Randy all along the way. Very special thanks to her. So, of course, all of the members of the different boards who took their time to vote on this. Personally, I could not be happier that it is A, over, but B, more importantly, that this was done. It was truly an ambitious project, and it would not have happened had all these people, including you, participated in it. So thank you very much. It was kind of a dream come true. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Peter. So next up, we have time for public comment. Each individual will be allotted up to 3 minutes for items related to board business that are not a consent or action item for this evening. For those items, we'll hold public comment just prior to voting on that item. Is there anyone here in person that would like to make a public comment this evening? If you want to join us at the podium, and you can share your name and where you reside in the district. Your municipality is fine.
Hi, my name is the mic working? No. Is it working now? Okay, awesome. Sorry. Hi, my name is Eli Carey. I'm a resident of Center County, College Township. I have been a Delta student for 8 years. I'm in my senior year at Delta High School right now. And last week there was some discussion about ATMs at Delta, which is our advisory team meetings. And there was some concerns addressed in that discussion about equity between the schools in our district. And while I absolutely understand those concerns, I also think it's worth understanding that, at least for me, and I think for a lot of my peers, that casts a lot of doubt into our heart, because I feel like we were made a lot of assurances in this transition into a school, and now in our first year, we're already looking at some changes with that. I think advisory team meetings are an extremely important part of how Delta runs, and while I understand that we're not talking about eliminating them completely, I think this also kind of takes away some of the power from the students, as we are a democratic school and we make decisions through our own government bodies. And while I do understand that the board has the authority to make these decisions, I think every time they do so, it kind of takes some of the core of what Delta is away from it. So yeah, it's just a little concerning for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Eli. Anyone online? Let's try and see if we can alternate tonight. Do we have anyone online for a public comment? All right. Anyone else here in person? Sure. You can just state your name and where you reside in the district.
Hello, my name's Sarah Jones. I'm a Delta Middle science teacher. And I also just want to comment on the ATMs component from last week. Personally, after teaching at Delta for 7 years, I look forward to meeting with the families, bonding over similar interests or vacations, and being able to have a calm moment to focus on just that one student at a time. Multiple ATMs throughout the year are invaluable for building strong relationships, monitoring academic progress, and supporting student growth. Regular communication fosters trust and collaboration between educators and families, ensuring that everyone is aligned in helping the students succeed. The students themselves get to be a part of this conversation, and they get to be the highlight of that meeting. It can just be about them. Some ATMs can be uncomfortable, but it's an opportunity to catch those kiddos before they fall through those cracks, so we can help them before the end of the year really get back on track and guide them to where they need to be. Students also get to be a part of that discussion to help get them on track and what's going to work for them. These meetings provide opportunities to celebrate achievements, address challenges early, and develop personalized strategies for improvement. So by maintaining open and ongoing dialogue, parents and teachers can work together to create a supportive environment that nurtures both academic and personal development. So I hope that we can continue to keep those multiple ATM days so we can keep to foster that relationship with our families and students. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in person for public comment?
Hi, I'm Jen Norse, and I live in Patton Township, and I have 2 children at Delta Middle. And I want to speak in response to last week's meeting. I emailed the board, and I thank board members for their replies very much. Basically, what I want to do is paint a picture of the importance of the ATMs. I was not aware that Sarah was going to be here tonight, so what I'm about to say is more personal than it otherwise would have been. But our first ATM, my child, one of my 2 children, when I told them that ATMs might be reduced, might be cut back a couple days, that you might not have as much time to do a deep dive on what is of concern to you going into your school year, or at the midpoint of the school year, or at the end of the school year, wrapping up the year. There was a very strong response to that, but stronger than I even expected, which was, in an academic sense, in a social sense, that first ATM saved my life. That I needed that so badly. And Sarah turned to us as a family and said, I have some experience with what you're talking about, what your concerns are, and I've got your back, period. End of discussion. And what happens in these ATMs, I've now had 10 of them, 5 times 2, they are so critical to the outcome of the year. I just can't understate the importance of them. And they provide a space for, the first 5 minutes, or hi, how was your summer? Hi, how was your winter? Hi, oh my gosh, yeah, the school year, this is what happened. We come into these ATMs prepared. There's a checklist, and we have discussed at home what we want to say. Our children are invested in these ATMs. They come in prepared for a nearly hour-long meeting. And when invariably at the 5-10 minute mark after pleasantries, there's a quick look at each other, right? Like, are we going to go for it? Are we going to cover what we talked about at home? And we do, and we dive in, and you get into the meat of the conversation. And every single one of them, we have done that with multiple advisors now. And it is just, it's incredible. I just can't understate the importance of them. I beg the district, the board, to not cut back on the number of them. My concern is that, well, I said it in quote from last year, the things I said to the board, I think that there is a real risk of inadvertently messing up something that you don't quite understand. And, we don't have data yet. This place isn't even a school yet. Just, can we let it breathe, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other individuals here for public comment?
Hi, my name is Paul McCormick. I live in the borough. Been teaching at Delta since the board created Delta Middle back in 2014. And I too want to add a little bit to the conversation from last week's meeting about ATMs. What they are, what I've experienced as a teacher, how important they are, not just in content, but in timing, especially at the middle level. It might be best to not think of these meetings as parent-teacher conferences. Instead, Delta and Middle and Delta High teachers act as advisors, as you've heard tonight. So I would call them advisory team meetings, meaning we tell our families that we are the primary contact of problem solving for their child's experience in school. We can troubleshoot intramural signups, we can troubleshoot mistakes in the schedule, we can fix mistakes between students who need to have restorative meetings when drama arises. Of course, all of these tasks fall to all teachers across the district, but it's a purposeful role of the teachers at Delta for decades. So our meetings go beyond the academic aspect of learning and intentionally seek to create a home-school connection. The timing of these meetings is very important, especially at Delta Middle. Many students and families who come to Delta are in search of something that they haven't experienced before. Oftentimes, the missing link is simply a human connection. And again, this is provided by all of our teachers in all of our schools, but at Delta, again, as you've heard tonight, it's at the core of our mission. More often than not, I have a 45-minute plus meeting scheduled with a family, and we take all that time to make sure I understand all that I can do, not just to help the new or returning student, but also about what the family is hoping for by applying and entering a new schooling experience, or what they'd like to see improved because they've been there already. In each of our advising groups, we have 15 families to meet with. On each of these ATM days, it takes the better part of 7 or 8 hours over 2 days to have all 15 of these purposeful conversations. The relationships built over 3 years, in some cases, becomes quite strong. I understand, or I think I understand, that it is difficult to have one school doing something different than the other schools. But this particular aspect of Delta, the homeschool connection, is absolutely vital in keeping Delta what it is. This is why parents attend these meetings in such large numbers. They feel like their child's not only known, but they feel like their child is seen in an individual way. As the board mentioned in its resolution last April, quote, Delta's identity and function reside in its internal governance, curriculum, and community. I'm just here tonight to share that ATM meetings with families, students, and teachers is one of the legs of a 3-legged stool that makes Delta what it is. If they were to be changed or scaled back, it would go at the heart of what our identity has been for decades.
Thank you, Paul.
I'd ask you to consider this at your February 17th meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Any others? How about a recheck of online just to be sure? None? Okay, with that, we'll move on. We're going to start our Committee of the Whole with Culture, Climate, and Learning. We'd like to call on Lisa Bola, Chris Merritt, and Stephanie Beaver to provide an update on gifted ed and learning enrichment this evening.
Thank you. As you know, in the past, our gifted administrator director would provide some updates pretty much yearly on some things that they're working on. And with Lisa being new, we thought this would be a good opportunity for her to highlight some of the work that's happening within the learning enrichment and gifted programs.
So coming new to the district, and do I have to push my button? Okay, yeah, there you go. Okay, so coming new to the district, I've spent the last all the new things, right? All the new bugs. One of the things that I needed to do was kind of take an inventory of what it looked like for gifted ed, being that it's one of my departments, right? So there's a significant number of kids. Within your data, there's almost about 8%. If you look at your Future Ready Index data, what you're kind of identifying as gifted ed students. I learned that there's some systems within SCASD. There are things like there's gifted no need, and then there's gifted with need. And then, of course, we're doing Jonathan did a fabulous job of starting to kind of expand those identifications into the 2E, twice exceptional students, and doing some more inclusive practices around language, English language learners, and those kinds of things. So the program over the last 10 years has evolved. What we ran into is that we may need to make some changes. There are a couple things that are on the gifted ed statewide horizon. One is that there is an MOU for gifted that if you were audited in 2014, you were given a pass for until I think it's 2026. So they're going to come, like they're starting to pick up schools again to get into the monitoring and check on this. That monitoring status, I think, when I talk to some of the gifted ed teams, and I've had an opportunity to meet with them a couple different times to say, hey, where were we last time, and what are we looking at needing to work towards this time? Because that's, the background in special ed helps with those things. So I just wanted to give you an update, not that anything is happening, but just some of the things that have come to my attention that we're just kind of starting to take a look at. And it looks like we just really need a committee at this point to really get the information, get the data together, see what's working, see what's not working, and try to pinpoint maybe some areas that we would need to fix is not the right word, but shift to make sure that we're in compliance with 2014. And I do know that you had received some letters. So for the good of the group, I wanted to explain there is the conversation that we have been having around the high school in specific for gifted supports. I did have an opportunity to meet with Shirley Moyer, who is the gifted ed director for PDE BSE, Bureau of Special Ed. And there's a concern that we have kind of a low number of students who are considered as gifted with GIEPs at the high school. And one of the services that we provide is the Learning Enrichment Service, which is a fabulous service. It's been commended. You saw the audit, or you saw the monitoring. It's a commended service. It's one thing that you do differently than everywhere else, believe it or not, that I can think of in Pennsylvania. You have an amazing program up there that helps kids that have GIEPs and kids that don't have GIEPs in accelerating their knowledge and their learning in a great environment, right? So students have an opportunity to go beyond. What the difference between what learning enrichment is that underneath PDE, the guideline, it cannot be a replacement. So what we need to be able to demonstrate is that you can't just say, we can't just offer this as the only gifted education option. So what I tried to do on the comparison slide was to say, when you're looking at learning enrichment, it's a general education initiative. It's basically what we would consider, because I do MTSS the other way, it's tier 2 supports, right? These 20% of kids get more support because they have more needs. They have things like university courses that they enroll in. They have independent learning opportunities. They have all kinds of things. But gifted, the difference is that the gifted ones are identified through strengths. So you would target a kid's learning pathway, independent learning pathway, based on strengths that a group of people have kind of assessed through some normed data. So that's a little bit different in the sense that the students in learning enrichment kind of move through, oh, I'm really interested in math, or I'm really interested in arts and engineering. When you're gifted, you have goals, basically, around reading because your reading is very advanced. So we're going to keep and continue. The other thing is the idea of what are called SDIs, and that's the trick between the gifted no need and the gifted yes or need. The students who receive specially designed instruction are the students that are identified as having gifted needs. So what they get in a general education curriculum is just not enough. So what that means then is that we look at things like curriculum collapse. So for example, a student takes a Unit 3 reading test and they know everything. So now what do? Why would we sit them through another Unit 3 literacy test? So what are we offering to, especially at the high school, when you're looking at health and wellness classes potentially, where kids could test out or opt out, but then could potentially do enrichment projects within the same domain. Not that they get to bypass a class, but that we're pushing that knowledge, that kind of gifted education component to health and wellness beyond just what they would get sitting in a unit. So that's the kind of tricky point in some of it. The other part is that the students that opt in to learning enrichment, and some of them opt out. But if you don't have a GIEP at the high school and you aren't in that learning enrichment, you kind of are in this abyss where we're not always knowing what's happening with you. And unfortunately, what that means is sometimes we have some of those kiddos who previously had a GIEP that slip. So we would want to see if there's anything, and I don't know that this to be true, it could be completely fine. But one of the things that we're exploring is that do we need to kind of keep those kids who opt not to be monitored through LE on something to kind of keep track and make sure they're okay before graduation, that they're getting what they need. So, and then the last part is that idea of monitoring. So inside of a special education plan, which is what a GIEP is, you monitor progress. So our teachers meet, and they meet about every student, say it's reading class, and they have an opportunity to discuss with the family, oh, out of 9 out of 10 units, your student had pre-tests that were more advanced and demonstrated that we replaced it with these goals, and we have to go even faster to kind of meet their need. So there's a component to giftedness that is tricky, which is that when you have a student who's very, very, very bright and identified with gifted, it's an interesting way how the neurobiology of that works, in the sense that you have a normative student who needs 10 opportunities to learn something. So they learn it, they take a while to get it right, and then they practice it maybe 10 times in the math lesson. Your gifted ed kids can learn it faster and practice it less. So what happens in that 15, 20 minutes of instruction is they got it in the first 10, and now they got 10 minutes to do whatever their brain wants them to do. And sometimes those are positive things, and sometimes they are not. So the idea would be, how are we pushing the kiddos to make sure that that time that they didn't need is being leveraged in a very appropriate way, and across a K-12 system. Does that make sense? Okay. So one of the things we put in, specifically because it's that idea of what a gifted educator should be doing, and many of you who have kids who are identified as being gifted, one of the big differences is providing those extra opportunities for enrichment and allowing them to make that continuing progress. They're gonna keep checking in. They keep coming back. They keep looking. They've been gracious enough to invite me to a lot of our meetings where one of them, the student was saying, well, I finished 4th grade math, now what do I do? And he did it in a semester, and I went, whew, you're moving, kid. Like, what do we do? Okay, and so those conversations are really exciting to be a part of, but it's only because he had such an involved teacher, and he's an elementary student, that she knows what's happening. So it's that really high level of involvement that student doesn't really have an opportunity to have a struggle in school, maybe behaviorally or in a different way, because we just keep feeding them, right? So we just keep feeding them. The other part is really, and some of it looks familiar, right? So you're looking at this multidisciplinary evaluation, but we're looking at seeking out diverse resources. The plethora of resources that Learning Enrichment, I have learned, offers is unbelievable. The resources for the kids, the opportunities for the students, that's there, and it's amazing. and kids can opt in and out. The biggest difference that would potentially happen is we're going to kind of guide them down a certain path, because now they're going to align within potentially art goals or science goals or some of those other pathways that we could take a look at, right? That they might want to be doing. But then this slide's in here just in case you don't know how monitoring works. So I feel like it's a little redundant, but if you're familiar with monitoring, and for the community, they come in and they conduct a monitoring. They do a couple different steps. One's a record review, so they'll pull students. They also do some interviews with families. They pull students' records to make sure we're in compliance. They do interviews with families, with students, with teachers, with general education teachers to see how familiar they are with the gifted program. Then they come back to us with an identified list of needs, which was copied to you from the 2014 monitoring. From that monitoring, then internally you create a plan. So the plan's approved by the board, goes out to the Bureau of Special Ed, and basically they say, yes, this works, we agree with you, we'll be back to check to make sure it happens. And then we spend the next 15 months, usually it's about 15 months, making sure all of the things that we promised to do are in place. So teacher training, adjusting policies, looking at some procedure things we have to do, all of that stuff gets checked on. There was a bit of a hiccup in the system. Unfortunately, because that Gifted Ed Bureau is relatively understaffed. We like to call it an unfunded mandate. That was our kind of way of looking at it. The person who was responsible for our monitoring was unable to come back and check that we had been in compliance. So what happened was some stuff kind of fell through the cracks, and then we went through and Jonathan did some assurances with Shirley Moyer. Those are what you posted and approved on the board. So we're okay, and they're not coming back for us, but we're going to come up against this monitoring and need to look very closely at what was happening before to make sure that we don't have the same thing. So they go, well, 10 years later, you're still doing it the same way. So those kinds of things for requirements, and that was in the letter to Mr. Johnson, just if we can't come into compliance, those are kind of what it has, this is what happens. So one of the things that when you're looking at the gifted guidance, it's framed under Chapter 16, so it looks like special education. It is an individualized plan for a student with an exceptionality because they need something different than the typical kid. That's why it's there. So you'll see that description for identification. There is a link to Chapter 16. If you want to go to the PDE website, you can explore what it looks like. What are some of the hallmarks of giftedness? So what are some of the procedures and the plans? And Jonathan honestly did a fabulous job of making sure that how the gifted works in this district is posted for the public, so they can go out to the public website and they can find some more resources there as well. So for my role, what I really did was find the executive summary, and it was maybe left for me. But basically what ended up happening is if you look, one of the big caveats that you see in number 2 is that idea of the screening and evaluation process. The first thing I do is look at the screening and evaluation process. Obviously, there's been great growth in that, so we've seen a lot of increasing. So I'm just looking at this point to say it's consistent, right? So me stepping back, how is that coming through in each building? Is it pretty consistent? And how we're getting our kids into gifted services. The learning enrichment needing to be separated from gifted and defined as general education. That's the big one. And that's the one in meeting with Shirley Moyer that she's like, hey, you kind of got to look at that, because what we have to be able to do is say these students have a GIEP and this is their pathway. These students have a GIEP and learning enrichment and a GIEP is their pathway. And these students don't have a GIEP and learning enrichment is their pathway. So it can be learning enrichment's your pathway, learning enrichment and a GIEP, or just a GIEP, but you have all 3 pathways at the high school to get the support you need, to get the individualized plan, to make sure that you have enough working through it. So all of the other things that you see some short-term outcomes, some specially designed instruction. The ones at the bottom, and I tried to summarize it for you, really they call them domains. But really the first one is refining and articulating the screening process. It was put into place. There were some changes made into the multidisciplinary component. There's a couple of drafts. It's evolved. I think every time we've seen that with it go through the screening, they keep refining it. So it's not done, but it's definitely really in great shape because there's lots of steps and lots of ways. We just want to make sure that the procedures are consistent. So that's what we're checking now. the gifted education, placement, and learning enrichment, when they talked about separating, they took it out of the elementary. So there's really no framework in the elementary anymore for gifted and for LE itself. But there is still LE in the middle and the high school. So those systems have stayed. The question is do we need something like LE for our advanced population in the elementary schools? Because you have a lot of students who are scoring in the top 20% of the state. So is there enough for them within your curriculum to really push them to what they could be doing in that not just gifted, but other kids as well, other students as well? And then the other part was options other than acceleration. Subject acceleration or grade acceleration. So this has been an ongoing conversation, especially with some of my folks at the middle school. We've got a lot of kids jumping, right? So they're grade 2, but they're grade 3 math. Or they're grade 2 and they're grade 5 math. It's fine, it's absolutely okay, but did we explore all the other options like curriculum collapse or potentially unit replacement or some of the other things, because they're basically staying in this linear model rather than doing that kind of spiderweb learning where they're taking a skill and attaching it to a different skill and putting it into science and more application focused. So a good example of that is when you do fractions, right? So you have a unit on fractions and fractional analysis. Are you looking at patterns in nature? So your extension unit would be, are we doing something in that unit with the expansion? So that's a partnership, and why Chris and I are here together. That as we're looking at what we're doing, how can we pull in our gen ed teachers to kind of get some of that differentiation, kind of get some of that push going for students in that way as well. And then, of course, there's the records review. So that was the topics. And those are just paperwork things. Everybody in every school district I've ever worked with, and I had, for the record, working at Patton, we sat on the other side of the table, right? So I'm on the school district side. I was on the how can I help you make this better side the last time. So every school district has records problems, because you're looking at a team of people who forget to send an invitation, and they happen to pull that kid's record out, and they're like, oh, you forgot to, look, it's not signed. And you're going, oh, come on, it's 1 of 7. So that's not as concerning to me, but I do want to make sure that everybody knows what we do. So, and I got a chance to meet with the Bureau Advisor twice. So her big kind of recommendation components that she had was to really look at the criteria for exiting. We're having a huge drop of kids from the middle school to the high school. Right now, our numbers in the elementary school are over, I mean, you've got almost 145 kids in the elementary school. You've got a consistent number, but then we have very, very few up at the high school. So why are we seeing these kids falling off at that level? Maybe they are getting what they need, but we might need to take a look at it. The next part is reflecting on that screening, so how we're getting students in. So nationally, it's interesting. This was something that I learned in talking to her. The new national standard's about 10% of the population. We're lower than that. So are we actually hitting all the kids that we could potentially be hitting? So that's why we're kind of stepping back and taking inventory of screening to make sure that we're in the right direction. And then identifying the services that are in addition to LE. So those were the 3 things that she really, and she and Jonathan had worked very, very closely together. She was very familiar with the district. She was very involved in some of the work that he was doing and making sure that we were just great. And she offered her support. She offered her help. She offered to try to come out and look at the records before we get monitored, which is amazing. So that's why we decided to create a committee. So one of the things that came to me as a recommendation was, hey, let's make a committee so that we have some good voices in this. The thing about gifted education is it really is the tentacle, the octopus, right? It touches gen ed, it touches special ed, it touches 504 plans, it touches behavior, it touches every little component. So we wanted to bring all those departments together. So there's some representatives from those. We'll start to meet at the end of the month. And then partnership with the PA Bureau of Special Education as well as the IU to try to go through some records, take a peek at things, and have those communications with the committee, as well as looking at those, trying to shift over to align the LE as much as possible. And then working on that collaborative scheduling component that in the special education, for a student with an IEP at the high school, the case manager is the person who creates the schedule, presents it to the counselors. We want to make that a consistent service so that if you have a GIP, you get the same service, that you get that idea of you get to have your meeting and you can go to the counselor and present your schedule and they try to get you scheduled. So that's where we are. As far as the timeline of work, we're just beginning. So I've had a couple of consultations. We've got the committee going. Everybody has been very gracious in my 60 days in the school district to say, yay, we'll join you on this. So I'm very excited. But Ellie is, and then we did separate in the course guidelines at the high school, just that that Gifted went back under special education, and Ellie is running in its own, it's still there, it's just that it's as a general ed service. And then we're going to have that meeting, BSE, and then they'll be out probably in March, and so that we can come up with an implementation plan sometime late spring, present it to you, see what we need to do. And then we can start to look at the document refinement and some of the information from the families and communities to make sure we're on the right track before anything comes back. And then there is a very high potential of support and training with Bureau as well as the IU. So I think that's something that's likely to happen over the summer. And then working next year through some implementation steps. This is, for me, not a one-year solve. It's slow, to go very intentional. And honestly, from the Bureau's perspective, as long as we're moving in the right direction, they're okay. That's all they want to see, is movement and acknowledgement, and then, you know, a plan to kind of keep going. So if it turns into a 3-year plan with the committee, that's what it turns into. But that's it. That's what I got.
Thanks, Lisa. That's really helpful. I think, particularly, for Gretchen and I, we've been here a long time and seen the very beginning of our institution of a true Chapter 16 gifted program. But for other board members, they've come along at different points in the way. So I think this recap is really helpful to kind of frame that whole change that the district has been going through. Questions? Yeah, Ann? Yep.
Slide 8, the GFSA records review states, per district policy, gifted educators will be encouraged to complete a gifted program. Does that mean certificate? Like, is that the same thing as a certificate? Is that an endorsement? I'm just wondering how important, it seems like it would be an important step, but not something you can do in like 20 minutes.
No. So it's usually a 12-credit endorsement. And actually, after the 2014 monitoring, the former superintendent asked all the gifted educators at that time to get their endorsement. So that came out of the last monitoring, and then what we did was kind of go through to see who had it. Some people actually have it in their hiring paperwork, that they would go ahead and go make sure that they complete it. So, but there were some people who weren't aware. So we're trying to work to see what that looks like, but it is only a 12-credit endorsement. Usually it takes a year. And there's it's a per district policy because it's not, you don't have to have it to teach gifted by PDE. So you don't have to do that. So that it becomes, some districts say yes, some districts say we don't need it, we're not worried about it.
So I was wondering in terms of compliance.
Yeah, that's not going to be something we have to actually have in place to be compliant. Yep.
Great. Other questions? Sure, of course.
Also on page 8, we got a couple of emails about LE, and we heard from some students when we visited the high school about LE, and I just want to point out on the slide it says we need to ensure LE is sustained as a general education service at the high school. So if anybody is thinking, is LE going away? No, it's not. It says it right there. So we had that conversation at the high school, and a couple students came up and they were concerned about it, and Laura Tobias was there, and we were like, I don't think so, right? So I think this looks like a good plan to me.
Thanks.
I just want to make a comment also. Thank you so much. This was really very thorough and very well thought of. And I really appreciate gifted education because these students really also need that specialness because of the fact that, like you said, they finish things really fast, and then what do? They could channel to positive and negative. So I'm really glad that this is being addressed, and I can't wait to, when you come back in the spring, to give us an update on where you are.
I'm excited. This is good. It's fun work for me. So both
So
personally
thank
and
you.
professionally. So, thanks.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just observe, having that institutional lens that some of us have seen a change. And when I first came into the district as a parent, we only had LE, and there wasn't a true gifted services program, and that was a problem that was identified by the state, and changes had to be made. And I think the key thing that I've learned is that, at one point in ancient history, we were approved to substitute LE for gifted programming. And it became really important, and I know Jonathan has shared in some smaller group settings that some board members have attended, that it's really important that LE be identified as general ed, and that whatever is happening for gifted students is considered outside of general education. And so that demarcation is really essential to the state, and understandably so. And so it makes sense that a lot of your efforts at the high school is, some recalibrating and things like that. So I really appreciate, I know when Jonathan came in and started all this process, it was a lot of work that was initially addressed at the elementary level and screening. And now that all that's in place, I'm happy to see us continue to trickle up at what we're addressing for students. So that's all I add. Yeah, Gretchen?
Yeah, I just have one question because it stuck out when I read it and it took me this long to find it. So in the memo, not the presentation, but the memo, under current and future steps, one of them is, let me find it again. It's the creation, now I can't find it again. It's the creation of a position at the high school.
So eventually, right now.
Of replacement of high school gifted education LE position. What does that mean?
So right now, we don't have, so in the law, chapter 16, there is a caseload. Like you can have, just like any special education teacher, you have a caseload. At this point, what we have is not a lot of cases. But if we put some of the steps into action, we will probably likely have more and more of a need to kind of look and reflect to see if we need somebody else at the high school to be able to support those students.
So is it a creation or a replacement? Because it says replacement in the memo.
Well, there are 3 positions right now, so.
Yes, so Sheila Abruzzo is retiring. So it would be a replacement of her, yeah.
Okay. Great. Thanks very much. This is really helpful. Next up in Culture, Climate, and Learning, we're going to review the PA School Climate Survey results from this past fall. We'll have Stephanie Beaver, Tanya Black, and Jonathan Bucher, and Danielle. Full crowd.
So good evening. Yes, I'll set it back. Hopefully you can hear that way. So we are here tonight. This was the 3rd year that our district has administered the Pennsylvania School Climate Survey to our parents, students beginning in grades 3 through 12, and our staff. We do a small one to the community. It is very small, so we historically do not present that. So you won't see that tonight, but we do send it to the community as well. So tonight what we're going to do is a broad overview that will share out the purpose of the School Climate Survey, how we use it. We are going to look at broad data for student, staff, parent strengths, and then growth. We'll do a little bit of a comparison. And then we'll end tonight with consideration steps moving forward from what we gain from this.
Good evening. So we'd like to start by defining school climate. So school climate refers to the quality and character of school life and is based on patterns experienced by students, parents, guardians, and staff, and their perceptions of school life. It is also reflective of our norms, values, goals, and interpersonal skills related to teaching and learning practices, our organizational structures, and our day-to-day living at school. And that definition is from the National School Climate Center. And then next we want to move on to survey purpose. So the survey information provides data for schools to view, analyze, and utilize while creating and implementing helpful changes to continue to expand on and improve our positive school environment and climate.
Okay. Can you hear me? All right, so within the survey, there are 3 area of domains. And so the first one is student support. This relates to the support services that students are receiving in the school. We ask questions about teachers, adults in the school, and how that is related within the school building. Social emotional learning looks at the process of acquiring and applying skills related to emotional regulation, development of healthy identities, responsible decision making. So this domain is looking for also measures student perceptions of their peers, social and problem solving skills. The third domain is school safety. This is measuring 2 things. How do they, are they physically safe? Do they feel physically safe in school? And how emotionally safe students are. In this next slide, these are just some examples of those domain questions to give you understanding of when students are asked. So the first example is, I think before I act. That is a response or a survey question example for elementary school students. The second one, my teachers really care about me. So it's looking at that, how are students and adults perceived in the school. That is in all respondents. And then for safe and respectful school climate, most students in my school treat each other with respect.
I got it. Every question within the school climate survey you can find. In fact, when we send to parents in the first years, we sent all of the surveys so that they could review. So they are public if you wanted specific information. The parent survey and the community survey does not break it down into those 3 categories. So when we look at those 3 areas, we only get that data for the overall student and then the staff. Additionally, each survey is a little bit different. The elementary survey has some different questions tailored to students in grades 3, 4, 5, and then the questions are more age appropriate in middle school and high school. We did add this slide, if you had looked at this prior to today, from a couple of questions that came. So really pretty consistent data, with the exception of 2 that are shifted. So if you look at the overall in 2023 compared to 2024 of overall participation, we are pretty much the same with our elementary, our middle, and our high school students. This year with our staff, we sent this out and actually asked it to be part of a requirement for some of their time that they had professional development time. And you can see we yielded a much better result. So when we set specific time instead of just making it volunteer, we were pleased with those results. The parent end, on the other end, we did not communicate as well as we have done in the past. In the past, we sent out several notices. We were hearing from parents that with all of our school messages, they're getting boggled down. So in hindsight, we probably should have sent it out a second time because as you can see, this year's participation is not near what it was in past years. Moving on to the student overview, again, I will present the elementary data and then Jonathan is going to present the middle and high school data. Go ahead, Jonathan. So to help you better understand the way to look at this report, a couple things, if you remember from years past, the state, it is out of a 4-point scale. So the highest score would be a 4. The state deems anything that is a 3.40 or above as really exceeding the state average, full fidelity, just above the expected outcome. The 2.6 to 3.39 is the expected outcome and really what the overall state average is. And then any areas that we see in red is considered a focus. So tonight you're seeing district data. What we do with this data is we present it to our administrators. They can break their data down by individual school. And that way, within their schools, they can look at what the needs are within their specific schools to add goals and target goals. We use this as a district data to kind of guide us and look at consistency. With the yellow and the purple, what we did is we tried to show you cohort data. And so in grade 3 in 2023, in that total average of 3 and 3600ths, to grade 4, you can see they slipped a little bit. Statistical relevancy, everything is within close to each other, so I can't really talk about how much of a shift and change that is, but you're going to see the ebb and flows of a little bit lower data than we had experienced. We gave this at the same time as we did last year. That was one of the changes that we did implement to try to look at it. But really, for the past 3 years, when we've given it in the November range, we've had pretty consistent data. In elementary schools, I'm going to come back to this. Our social emotional learning, our students believe that they are doing a nice job with it. You will see, I missed that one green with social emotional learning in grade 3, but really we exceed the expectation. Our students report out that they feel good about how they treat others and how they can own their actions, things like that. With the student support, again, we fall within the normal ranges, and again, a little bit of a drop from cohort to cohort, but overall really staying within what the state averages are. And then the safe schools, I'm going to come back at the very end. Steph's going to show a graph, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the differences within our elementary school of some of the things that we're seeing. We can, another question that was raised was, can we break this down to look at the overall population of the percentage of the students that took it? Does it align with our current student populations? And we can do that. That is not presented in this report, but for the most part, it really does pair out. For example, I think within our parent survey, 78% of the data collected from parents was from white. About 3.4% were from Black or African American, so it pretty much parallels. We could get that if people wanted more information. It's available. But when we break down within the different races, what we did again is we took any that didn't have a total of 20 or under and removed that data. So you're seeing the 5 categories compared to the overall comparison. And again, what this more or less says is we're pretty consistent. We are dropping a little bit, especially within some of the safe schools area. And you will see even across in social emotional with our students, we have several areas in the green, or saying we're doing above the state average within our schools.
So I'm going to talk about the middle school. So just like Danielle said, the cohorts there by color as they follow from 23 to 24, an upward trend, not trend, just following that upward. Like she mentioned, there's a 4.point scale. In this particular survey, there was just over 1,000 students, 1,070 in 23 and 1,071 in 24 took the survey, so very consistent there. So in that cohort, pretty much showing falling in the 2.6 to 3.9 range for the most part of our students, and some above that point. And then broken down, disaggregated, I would just say, to summarize this slide, comparing 23 to 24, there's a slight downward movement in all groups by 0.2% compared to 23. So it is fairly consistent across the board by the different groups that are listed there. And then at the high school, there's a couple areas that are shown in red. So if you look at the second grouping, the 2.55 in 24 and 25, as an compared to the statewide average, and how we compared to that. Moving forward to this survey, there was about 1,000 students, 1,079 students took that survey in 23, and it was down slightly in 995 in 24. And there's a slight, overall, there's a slight upward movement in 24 to 23. That's good to see as well. But pretty consistent there, as well as the parent overview. Sorry, moving on. Disaggregated. So showing that 2.59, if you look in the SEL average, that is an area of concern in the 23 school year. that was falling into below or at the state, below the state average. A slight increase in the 24 year, with the majority of those areas falling around the state average or higher, but not exceeding. Pass it over to Danielle for staff overview.
So again, it is really interesting. Some of the data does not give you statewide data, some of the reports, but other ones do. So we were able to pull staff statewide data as well. And as you can see across the state, if you look at the first column of statewide and then compare, we were able, the second column is all staff of State College, and all staff includes administrators. I think there were 35 administrators that took it, all professional staff, that would be our teachers, and then any support staff. So we really encourage all staff members to take this to get an idea. And then what the report does is breaks it down. We gave you just by staff. We could break this down into the different professional groups and share that out. But it is pretty consistent with the overall state averages. And our elementary, I'm going to keep putting out, even though the school staff is showing consistent with the SEL, that's going to come back into play. But overall, it pretty consistent data across the buildings. When we get to the end of the slide, again, this is the same. It is just broken down a little bit more by the different groups for the staff overview. There is that State College staff that has our SEL average in 2024. Not that it's in the red, but it's sitting at 2.8. Our elementary school students rank themselves much higher than the staff perceives them. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. We've seen that. You can look in 2023. It was the same. Otherwise, it's pretty consistent. So our staff rates themselves pretty much similarly to how our high school and middle school students rank themselves, but there is a disconnect with that. My apologies.
I'll just point out there, the green, so compliments to the elementary team for the parent reporting aspect of this. This is parents K to 12. So kindergarten, first, second, third, and fourth, parents reporting higher than the state average. Fifth through 12th is reporting around the state average within that range. So we did have, Danielle had mentioned this before, fewer parents did respond in 24-20 this school year versus 23. And we've identified some ways to get that message out a little bit better, to get hopefully some increased participation from parents. So yeah, that's that summary there. As far as looking at the next slide, as far as the breakdown disaggregated, there was a little bit of movement in some groups, some slight improvements in Black and Hispanic, and conversely, a slight downward movement in multiracial and Asian, and all parents on average stayed the same across the board those 2 years in comparison. That would be a summary of the parents on how they're seeing and reporting on our schools by group.
So we don't gather a lot, again, because the parent data is not broken down into categories, but we did just show you a comparison of all groups. Overall, parents' perception of us is higher as a total average than any of the other groups, but we are really showing in that 3 range in 2024. So we've made some gains overall. Middle school, a little, that's really the one that is close and dipped a little bit, but otherwise we're in the normal ranges across all comparisons.
Can I ask a quick question, actually? Even before we sort of move on, is I'm interested in this in part because you now have 2 years of data, so in a sense, sort of a longitudinal comparison. I'm wondering if when you look across these tables at the different levels, do you see any evidence of things that you did being really effective and have insights into what worked or what didn't at each level? Because I think if we're going to use the data, that's probably a good way to start.
So I would say in our past future ready goals, we really broke some of these items down, and our schools, every school data looks a little bit different. So they are the ones that are really doing the work within their schools to look at that. So when we look at these areas and we talk about them, Mr. Johnson had us present them at the last administrative team meeting. They get in, they look at it, and then we're really having them look at this is our overall. I can tell you so far, getting it in November, then the holiday, we haven't had a lot of time, but with Stephanie on board, some of the things that she's going to be sharing as far as what we want to do in the future is that type of stuff, and really trying to determine, do we need to focus on any specific area by breaking it down into questions.
I feel like I'm the like person here. So I think you're just right. Like, you know, what good is data if you don't do anything with it, right? And so we started looking at them like, oh, why is it? Why do we have that number there? And if I started looking at the questions and really breaking down, I'm probably a data nerd here. But I mean, our goal is that we want to promote safe and healthy school environments where students can grow academically, social, emotionally. So what does data say about what's happening in our schools? And so one of the things that we looked at was this graph, is that there's a discrepancy, right? So our students are reporting something, but our staff are reporting something different. Why is that? Like, we need to take a deeper dive in looking at that. And I'm gonna let Tanya talk, like, we've started that process. But part of that is engaging school teams, because it's one thing to look at a district team, but these things happen in school. What is happening at the school level, and what is the information students are reporting, what's the information staff reporting, and really understand that, how we can establish teams to promote school climate by looking at this data and developing action plans that are really like moving forward with students. And so Tanya, on the next slide.
And I'm going to butt in here just for a second. The other thing I'm very excited about is this venture kind of came 3 years ago. Dr. O'Donnell was still here, and it's been in the assistant superintendent's hands. And we now have been able, of course, to begin to turn it over to our directors, who can take more time with it, be working with our buildings. They are also working, we have a district-wide positive behavioral team that meets monthly. They will also this year for the first time be taking this data and looking at it and drilling it down too. But with the oversight of these two, I am really excited about what can come with it.
I think one of the things I'd be interested to see when you start to break it down by school at the elementary level is, do we see any, even though it may not be a huge effect, do we see any difference between the schools that had an elementary dean of students and those that didn't? Similarly, I think that what I was looking at when I looked at the high school data was whether or not it's statistically significant, right? I saw some evidence of growth there at a time when, when we have the principal of the year, of course, at the high school, but also they've been putting a lot of effort. I mean, they came and presented some of what they were doing as part of their PBIS for culture building, and I think you can maybe see some of that reflected here. That's just what I read out of the data.
So, yes to all that. And we are going to continue to move forward with next steps to do exactly what you just talked about, Erin. You know, diving into what's working, what's not, what can we have as correlational data, causational data, those types of pieces. And with that in mind, one of our next steps is we have begun, this part of the we, Stephanie and I, working with a consultant from IU8 who lives this life daily in terms of trauma-informed and school climate work, to help us continue to build, work with our PBIS teams, leadership level as a whole, building levels, to continue to spur this on, looking at the data, what does it mean, what do we need to do as far as future steps. And in addition to that, we are continuing with the external audits by Dr. Swearer and by Dr. Erschbacher. Our building administrators, as Danielle said, are going to disaggregate their data at the building level with their school teams and staff. And we will continue to look at the data and use those PBIS groups and school leaderships teams as focus groups. You know, what's happening, why, what guiding questions will lead us, what does the data tell us, what will we specifically do moving forward. And as you shared, Danielle, the perception gap between students and faculty and staff, that's a very interesting area for us that we're interested in learning more about, that you highlighted and brought to our attention as we looked at the data. In addition, as always in State College, we're looking to engage with families and community members in terms of our PTOs and other groups to look at enhanced systems of supports and other resources to make sure that our SEL is on point and that we continue to focus on school climate and student well-being. Thank you.
So we're also providing opportunities for our administrators to get together and share their successes. For example, Laura Tobias has been able to share some of the things that they're doing with the mental health days with the middle school principals. Hopefully we can get them to incorporate some of the things and successes that are happening at the high school, at the middle schools. In addition, I mean, Laura being who she is, she's sharing her successes with at the state conferences as well. So she's not only trying to affect her own school district, but other school districts in the area.
Question? Yeah, Dan and then Carly.
So first, it's a question about data. So March 11th of 2024 is the last school climate survey results you reported out. You had the October 22 baseline for elementary at 3.4. At that point, you reported November 2023 that the total score was 3.39. On this presentation, you have 2023 total average at 3.29, right? And I think that's significant to dig into, because if it truly was 3.39, then there was a significant drop from 23 to 24 in the elementary. Do we know which number was accurate? Is it 3.29 or the 3.39? I have the file pulled up here from.
So you're referencing from last year?
Yeah, so.
Separate from this presentation?
Right, so I pulled it up just to compare. I wanted to see from our October 2022 baseline where we've come for the past 3 years. So last March, we reported 3.39 was the November 2023 score for elementary. Overall, right? I'm looking at the overall, not breaking down each individual category. So like on this slide, right? The 2023 average on the presentation that was given to the board last March shows that the 23 average was 3.39.
So remember last year, I want to say last year we gave it twice. So or is it 2 years ago we gave it twice?
That would be 2023, right?
2023. I'm thinking because he's saying March, it must have been.
That's when it was reported out, was March 11th,
It was
right?
okay, we waited.
And on the presentation from that meeting, right, I pulled up the attachment. I know it seems trivial, but it's important just to see where we truly are with that drop, because if it is 3.39, then that elementary range saw a more significant drop than any of the other areas of the district.
Well, okay. If you look at slide 9, which is what you have up there, we'll go back one, just because there's less numbers. Okay, so if you look at the 2023 total average, I think that's what Dan's looking at.
Exactly, yeah.
Clearly, it has to be 3.39 because the average of those three numbers can't be lower than all three of those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing that that's a typo, just mathematically. but I would also just go back to Erin's point that it's really hard to know if there's a difference without any measure of statistical significance. So I don't want to make too much of a big deal about a number, but I think you're right, Dan, that that's probably a typo.
And it is, when we look up 2023,
Yeah.
it was 3.39.
So maybe that's a difference, but it's without doing some sort of a measure, a test of statistical significance, I can't make anything out of those numbers as a change. Is it a real change or is it just indistinguishable depending upon the sample size?
I think the hard thing too will be, we only have 2 data points longitudinally. I think you're right, it is a dip, but what is that going to look like over the next, say, 6 years? Do we typically kind of vacillate a little bit like that? We
Well, I
won't
mean,
know.
since we started it in October 22 and got that baseline, we've dropped every year, elementary-wise. Might only be 0.1% here or small, or 0.1 point here, but we've dropped every year in the overall score since 2022.
Sure,
in elementary.
and we're also looking at it, and we don't know. Again, that's why we really need to dig down. So we are looking at students now in 3rd grade who came to us during COVID, right? So the very first year, they would have been just coming out of it. And when you look at kind of that stuff, we don't necessarily have that answer. And I apologize for the typo. I am the one that did those reports, so I will take full responsibility. But it certainly wasn't to show that we had dropped. Where our biggest concern is, why is our staff thinking that we are not, that students need a lot of work with our social emotional? That's what they're reporting, but our students are saying we can do this. We are resilient, and we really want to work through to find out why that is.
That's an interesting point about, the number of kids that we're having that maybe missed preschool, missed other opportunities at really critical developmental stages, that lagging COVID response. I know Peter has his hand up, but Carlene was waiting and she was next, so I'm going to go there next.
Yeah, my question was just on the survey itself, and especially when you said engaging families and community members. In what language is the survey given, like especially for the EL students and some of the parents that probably didn't take it?
It is the state. The state does supply a Spanish version, but does not give the amount of, and when they take that, it is a direct link to what the state offers. So it is not, we cannot run that through our systems because it is a survey built by the state. That has been something that was recommended to the state. One of the things that we didn't share, and we probably should have, is the state is currently trying to find a researcher to redo the survey. I spoke last year. I actually, Stephanie and I are going to be looking at a national survey just to see. We have a meeting coming up, but there are other surveys out there. But this is the recommended survey by the state. They keep assuring us that it's going to get better, but it is difficult to maneuver. But that would be the why. So you bring up a very good point, but that is really out of our control.
Do we add any extra questions? Because I remember in the past, we've added a few, like on the SRO issue.
Yeah, so because they are not part of our Future Ready plan, we do not add extra questions. This year was our PA school climate only.
Okay, thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, I guess it's just a comment, and I think it just goes sort of to what Dr. Bader had said, that with so little longitudinal data, it's hard to make much of you can't make a conclusion really about anything. There's no trend in 2 years, so I don't know, the comparison year to year could just be noise. It could be sampling. I mean, it can be any number of things. And then, I guess that if this gap that you're interested in were to persist, then, I think that's differences in perception between children and adults is pretty common. And, I don't want to be flippant about that, but I just wonder how much I wouldn't want to fetishize making a thing out of something that could just be a difference in perception.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to take a moment on slide 25, the next steps in the process. Bullet point 2, I just want to make a comment and thank the community for really pushing the board and the administration to do those 2 external audits, because obviously they're having more far-reaching impacts than anybody ever thought, since we're going to be using them in this process and others as well. So thank you, community, for pushing us to do that.
Gretchen?
Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, I think Peter makes a good point that, you know, one year to the next, you can only, you know, look at that so much for so many questions. It's not going to be sufficient for other questions. But I was wondering, so if you do just take a snapshot in time, which seems more appropriate. So I get the elementary students versus staff perception. That's laid out really clearly. I was trying to find the parent perception for K through 5. It doesn't have years. There's only 1, not 2 years, whatever. The average, I calculate it real quickly, was also higher than students or staff. And so I'm just wondering, I mean, maybe it doesn't do any good to wonder, but what the first thing that popped into my mind is, you know, is this possibly a morale question, like a staff morale question? But the other part that's really interesting is that the parent average is even higher than the student's perception. So when you look at, yeah, that's what I'm talking about, is elementary. So when you look at their perceptions, the families, the parents and the students, it's interesting how much higher it is. And I mean, I know that you're going to look into that and everything, but I just thought I'd point out the parent perception too, because I think that's really interesting. And maybe the staff has some things to say that we're not aware of. I don't know. And it's interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, Dan.
One final piece. I know before we've added district-added questions, might this be a good place that we can fold in next year, the asking the community, parents and students about restorative practices and how they feel about those? Could we add this into that survey to get a pulse on that as well? Because I think it's important. We all think, you know, district-wide, everybody says it's working. I just want to make sure the students and parents feel the same way.
So I just want to make this pretty clear. Restorative practices was a district-wide initiative that came out by a specific group of community members, are African American, Black, multiracial, ethnic, to do this. So I want to be cognizant of what we're asking and why we put those services into place and why we're doing it. I have no problem with evaluating and seeing the input of what people are talking about, but there was a specific reason that we put those restorative practice and cultural responsive instruction and practices into place. I just wanted to make that comment.
Anybody else on this side of the table that didn't have opportunity? Okay. I appreciate the work you're doing. I think it's great that buildings are looking at this individually, because we know there's some issues that will be district-wide and some that might be unique to each building. So we'll look forward to knowing how that all works out. Thanks very much for your work on this and presentation. Up next, we have facilities and grounds. Mike Fisher's going to provide an update on the Mount Nittany Elementary project, and then I think after that, we'll take a brief 5-minute recess. You didn't have another question? Okay. Okay. Sometimes there's this big thing there. Okay. All right.
Okay, just a quick update.
I know it freaks everybody out.
Just a quick update on Mount Nittany Elementary. We're getting ready to kick the project off. So we've gone through a couple rounds of code review now. We're down to, I think, 4 comments left to kind of incorporate with the drawings. Most pretty minor. The largest code comment we had was a permanent sidewalk out to the 2 soccer fields in the building, which wasn't in the original plans. So that was kind of the one that had the most impact. So we're looking at, over the next notices to proceed, kind of middle of this month, over the next week or two. We'll issue to all the contractors. And then requested by, I think, the 13th of this month, a preliminary schedule for the first 3 months. Pretty hard schedule the first 3 months, along with milestones throughout the entire project at that point. Once we have that in place, we'll be meeting with all of our internal stakeholders, athletics, Mount Nittany Middle, Mount Nittany Elementary, the instructional team there, just to kind of go through the impacts of the project and how it's going to affect traffic flow, student flow, impacts of the building, that sort of thing. And then, yeah, I mean, we're going to start breaking ground here mid-March, so early mid-March. So we're pretty excited.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Any questions or comments?
Okay.
I think we envision kind of about every other month or so really getting into a nitty-gritty as far as a project update. Pretty light right now, but that's kind of what our thought process is. And if there's a lot of things going on, we'll push that to monthly then as well.
Do we get to do like a golden shovel groundbreaking ceremony? Is that
So
I hope
we
not.
didn't, yeah. Well, it'll be winter, and I think with a lot of our elementary projects, we did do it at the high school, but, yeah.
I'll
But I
just
think we did do ribbon cuttings at the opening of all new buildings, and I know this is just an addition, but it has some special spaces, like for our multi-disability students, so I think, yeah.
I'll just show up with a shovel.
We'll want to highlight it.
I'm sure that's something I can accommodate if the board would like to do that.
I think we'll be okay. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Mike. Okay, sorry, Joe, we're going to take a 5-minute recess, but you're welcome to come set up. So we're going to be on recess for 5 minutes. I think everybody's back, so we're going to call ourselves back into recess, and we're going to move on to budget update from Joe Vigilant.
This presentation's really divided into two parts. One is what to expect throughout the budget process. The other is going to be an update for where we are in 24-25. We really didn't look past 24-25 in this presentation because we're just now getting the detailed budgets in from the various budget heads and different things to compile the documents and assessing some of the changes coming up. Mike mentioned the construction project. Well, we're going to have a financing discussion later on this year, which is going to impact debt service, just another line item within the budget. So starting out with the budget update, the first part of this is very similar to last year. It's just more of a review. Three major components, which are the line item detail, the function and account detail, and the budget and projection summary. So within the line item detail, that's more departmental and accounting staff. The function and accounting detail, it's significant involvement of accounting and cabinet staff. And then for the projection, the budget projections and summary, that more involves the cabinet and the board for the strategic direction. So as you can see, moving up within the pyramid, you start in January with the 40-plus budget heads completing their line item budgets that were due in last Friday, and it goes up through the end of June with steps each way, leading to the board and cabinet reviewing and finalizing the budget. So the key documents, really unchanged from last year. We've tried to do some refinements and some small changes in internal processes that hopefully will help and get the data flowing up a little more smoothly than it did last year. Plus, it's my second year through this process, so hopefully I'm a little more understanding and helpful within the process than I was last year. So goals of each of the board documents. The projection master is a longer-term view of the impact of the budget on the district's long-term financial viability. We're trying to make sure that we're looking beyond just the next 12 months in the budget cycle, really taking a longer-term view of it and showing the cause and effect relationships of decisions. We've talked about that a lot this year with the growth of different segments of the budget at different rates, and it can throw things potentially out of balance, especially if you have large debt offerings and different things, but you've counted on your debt being fixed. Board presentations keeps the board and public informed of the status of the budget being developed and allows the board and the public to offer their thoughts, priorities, and feedback to the staff. And then the budget matrix, which is shown on the next page. If you look, and this is fairly small up there, hopefully you can see it, but going down are the major components of the budget, whether it's salaries, benefits, charter schools, supplies, equipment, and then the instructional function going down the left side of the page in the rows to, this is very important within the PD reporting structure. So switching on to the current year financial update, there's a listing of budget amendments that are over 100,000 that have been passed so far this fiscal year. And then the assumption changes. In August, we did mention about the increased state aid, which came through. Interest on investments has been continuing to be very strong. The administration made the decision to fix in a large number of the investments into CDs this year versus remaining in a fixed money market account last year, and it's really paid dividends through the first half of the year. We've reduced contingency and committed fund balance usage for health insurance by about approximately $3 million. That is put in there for a structural component so that we did not exceed our expenditures in case of a bad health insurance year like what occurred last year in terms of significant usage. Through 7 months of this year, we're able to say with some confidence that we appear to be trending that won't be necessary. And then we've had positive realty transfer tax experience so far this year, and the interim real estate tax is up as well. The interim real estate tax is really up, but it was down last year. It was due to the late timing of the billing versus when somebody made the payment. So that just sort of worked out and it'll balance out in the end. And then the delinquent property taxes, they are trending much lower than the last couple years, as is local services trending lower than budget, but about where we were last year. So that's something to keep an eye on. So again, the financial documents to follow stop at 24-25. They don't go beyond that aspect into the full 10-year projection. So for this one, this is just an explanation of where we were at the final budget presentation through the board changes shown today in the document and what we're doing and giving to you guys. So the first one is on the local, state and federal revenues, with the largest changes in the local and the state revenues as explained. On the expense side, the board presentation, the changes, a large portion of it are the bottom three lines, which is a removal of the health insurance contingency against the committed fund balance, and then a capital transfer, which was recommended largely out of the state budget aid increase in August. So going forward to the fiscal year 24-25 changes, again, the yellow highlights the big change in the committed fund balance being removed. And then going to the revenue pages, as you can see on here, again, it shows the line item changes for what we had explained to you before. And that was also in the revenue and then also on the pages on the right side for the expenses. You'll notice the 23-24 actual column, that is all yellow because that is new information with the closeout of the audit year. When the last time we had shown you, there were no audited figures within those numbers.
Joe, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, you may.
Just while it's there. On slide 12, when we look at the difference in federal actual from 2023-24 to our projected, is a decrease, and I'm guessing, is that partly the finishing of spending ESSER funds?
It is.
You probably told us this before, but it's just
Yes.
sticking out to me today, thinking
Yeah.
a lot about federal funding today.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and that's yeah, a good idea to keep the eyes on that. So I think you sort of stole my thunder maybe for the last slide. But staff is recommending that a 0% increase be dropped from consideration going forward in the 25-26 budget process due to expenses growing at a faster rate than the real estate assessed value growth. On top of that, with discussions with the assessment office of the county, there are a number of high dollar appeals that are starting to show up within Center County and within State College Area School District, and their recommendation is to reduce that assessed value growth factor from 1.2% to 0.9%. And that is not on new construction type of, that still remains strong at the 1.2%. You're just getting a lot of larger businesses, larger taxpayers doing appeals on the property, and there's concern that that's going to eat into the growth. Again, there is definitely some uncertainty surrounding future federal and state funding. The one thing I've learned in my almost 2 years here is we find out the state number after our budget's passed. And it makes, throwing some darts out there pretty important. And then that projected fund balance cliff does need to be managed prospectively rather than retroactively. With the Act 1 percent increase allowable, if you get yourself behind that fund balance cliff, it makes either significant cuts necessary or a referendum necessary. So with that, I will be happy to take any questions you may have.
Has Act 1 been determined yet and what it is?
It has been.
I
It's
thought so.
4%.
Okay.
So within the, at the first time we presented to you, the projection master will come in at 0, 2, and 4%. We're asking that 0% be removed from consideration, but 2% was a midpoint between no tax increase in the Act 1 cap.
Great. I just thought it was a good reminder to remember where it is. Questions for Joe? Peter?
Yeah, so, given what Jackie said earlier, that a congressman has introduced a bill to dismantle the Department of Education, we have about $1.6 million that would come from the federal government to us. If that were taken away or disrupted, what would that do to the education of our students? What does that go into, and what could the effects be?
Okay, so the funding aspects actually go into a number of different levels, different places. I would say one of the largest ones is your title revenue, and a lot of the title revenues are spent on staff development and salaries. Another key area would be the subsidies for the food service programs.
I'd also add IDEA.
IDEA
is
as
all
well as
federal
salaries.
dollars.
Yes.
What is IDEA?
IDEA is funding for special education.
Yeah, individuals with disabilities. Yeah.
Correct, and our costs for special ed per student can be very variable. So
Mhm.
it can be something like a student with some speech pathology issues to be addressed versus some of our multi-disability students that have full-time aides and extensive care that we provide them in our schools.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, given that I don't even want to call them proposals that are on the table, the threats that are on the table from the federal government are threats to families in our community. You know, people who really have, you know, anything, as Dr. Bader said, from, you know, needing just reading support to students with incredibly challenging, you know, multiple disabilities. And speaking for myself, you know, that there may be other avenues through the Department of Justice and others by which, you know, funds can be delivered, but they are statutorily obligated by Congress. And I personally very strongly encourage members of the public to advocate on behalf of students who need help, you know, and we are entrusted with them in the district, and we are to be in loco parentis for them, to care for them. And so these kinds of damage, you know, these kinds of things just make me nervous, and I think warrantedly so.
Yeah, and I'll add IDEA does not, I say this every time we talk about IDEA, doesn't fully cover the costs of special ed, nor does the state funding. When IDEA was passed, the goal was 40% funding, and we're not even nearly there. So.
But every bit is
Yeah, exactly. I'm not downplaying the.
I know.
When we're talking about big dollar figures for individual students, those dollars matter because every dollar that comes from the state or the federal government doesn't come from our taxpayers. Yep.
And I think it's easy to look at our budget and note that the percentage of our budget that comes from the federal government is relatively small. But every dollar is going to help students. And so any dollars lost there is going to be detrimental to our students. And I think that's just the bottom line. So whether it's all of it, some of it, you know, it can, you know, and we do have a representative who has supported increasing funding to IDEA in the past. So there is room to like call our GT Thompson and say, hey, you've supported this, and we want to make sure that our students get what they've been promised. So.
Agreed. And while it is a smaller portion of our budget for our district for those that care about public education and students in general, other districts highly rely on those federal funds. And so while it would be harmful to us and we could weather that storm, other districts would be greatly impacted by the loss of federal dollars to the point of struggling to even function for any students. So it's an important issue.
And it's not like you can go away and get away from those services that you have to provide. They're mandated. And so that means you're going to have to use other funds and monies to supplant or to come up with those funding dollars.
Correct. Yes, so the laws are all still there, and we don't want to see the funding support go away. Any other last comments about the budget? Thank you, Joe. He's very helpful. So that concludes Finance Committee, and that concludes our Committee of the Whole section of the meeting. So at this time, we have one other opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone in person that would like to make a public comment at this time? Anyone online? All right, last call. All right, we're going to move on then. Next, we have our consent agenda, which includes several items that we will address in a single motion for approval, and we're going to go through each category individually for any questions from board members. So any corrections to the minutes? Usually that's a no. Next up, we have finance and personnel. We have a couple grants, an MOU, and routine human resource and technology contracts. Anything? Okay. Instructional programs, we have a foreign exchange student, our first one for the school year, as well as routine travel. Any questions on this item? Nope. Okay. Then finally, we have physical plant with some routine contracts. No? Okay, did you have a question, Deb? Oh, sorry, I saw your hand go up. So I did want to just really highlight one item in particular. In our technology routine items, we're purchasing a hearing assistance program for the boardroom, so I'm really grateful and appreciative to this effort at accessibility. This system will include 14 wireless belt packs, each with an earpiece, as well as 4 neck loops for individuals who use assisted hearing devices. So these neck loops will be worn like a necklace and work with the coils and hearing aids to provide better sound. So more information along with instructions are going to be provided when that equipment comes in, and we'll make sure to have hopefully some information available to the community about how to access those items should they need them. And with that, I'd like to call for a motion to approve the consent agenda, items 10 through 13.
Buck, so moved.
I'll second.
All right, that's been moved in second. Final questions? Any public comment on the consent agenda? All right, board members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Consent agenda is passed. We have one action item this evening. It's a motion to approve Mount Nittany Elementary Expansion Project's Builder's Risk Insurance, and this is shown in attachment 14A.
So moved. I'll second.
All right. Such enthusiasm at the end of the meeting. All right, that's been moved in second. Any questions on this item? We talked about it a little bit at our previous meeting. Oh, sure, Carmen.
These kinds of insurance, does the contractor also have an obligation to have this insurance? Is it just us, or is it both?
They do. They also have insurance.
They also
as well.
have it, and so are we duplicating it? Are we providing half? Like, how does that work?
I'm not an expert in insurance, but I will do my best. Is that this kind of covers us, if anything that the contractor's insurance would not pick up or would dispute or fight. A lot of times it's materials stored off-site that haven't made it there or en route, right? So a semi-truck's bringing large equipment in, our insurance would cover that where it might get disputed through the contractor's insurance as well. And the policy is for the entire project amount. So I asked that same question because it seemed counterintuitive to have to insure the entire project amount for something that would have most likely be just a piece of it. And I was told that's how it is. It's any builder's risk policy. It's for the entire project amount. So
I guess if that asteroid comes that they talked about, it might hit us. That could take out the whole project.
Right.
That's a little bit of facetiousness. I don't know if you saw that in the news.
I asked that same question. Yes.
Yeah. Other questions about the builder's insurance? Thanks, Mike. Any public comment on this item? All right, board members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that item is passed. That concludes our agenda for this evening. Thank you for attending or participating. Looking forward to future meetings. We have, as Mr. Johnson mentioned, February 5th, the SCASD Reads event at the high school at 6 p.m., and board members will be there for conversations with the community. We also have February 17th, regular board meeting here at 7 p.m. in Panorama Village. February 18th, we'll have Policy Development Committee meeting at 1:30 in the boardroom. And with that, I'd like to adjourn the State College Area School District Board of Directors. Have a good evening, everyone.